No, I'm just kidding. No. You gotta give Moses his props. I mean, again, the poor guy. I feel for him. I
Yeah.
feel for him.
I love that you feel for him. I do.
You don't?
No, I
No,
do.
you think it's like all dandelions,
No.
joy.
No.
Like
No.
Moses wakes up every morning. He's like
Another
with a
day.
smile on his face. Can't wait to go to work. Let me have my Senka or whatever.
Yeah.
Folgers. I don't know what they drank
No.
back in biblical times. Kind of coffee. No, I just think I think it's tough. Tough.
Yeah.
Oh, we're on?
We're on.
Oh.
We've been on for 2 minutes.
Oh. Hi everybody. Rabbi Saroken, Jeremy behind the glass. Those are outtakes. We'll edit them later. Moses, of course.
It's
Yes.
time. It's time to shine. So the parsha we're coming to is Yitro.
Mm.
Yitro, I would say, okay, so a little bit of background. Yitro is Moshe's father-in-law, and the Torah portion opens with him coming for a visit. And he's also a priest in his own right, and he comes to visit Moshe, and I would say that he sort of shows up in let's sort of say, questionable way. We'll talk about that maybe first. Sort of why is he showing up? Um, and what's the impact of his appearance on the scene? You want to start with the why?
Well, he's coming. He's bringing Moses' mishpacha, right? The fam. I mean,
Why weren't they there?
so it's unclear. It's sort of like Moses had a very long business trip to go on. And so he Moses previously, in last week's episode, met actually a couple of weeks ago. What do they call that? Recap today?
Uh-huh.
Is that recap? Met his wife and they had children, and that all has happened. But then Moses sort of leaves all the family life behind, and he goes to take care of the business in Egypt. I remember actually. I don't remember when it was exactly, but probably number of years ago, and you gave a sermon about that. And, you know, in other words, talking about like when your work responsibilities pull you away from family. You probably don't remember it either, but it's people don't realize that we don't remember what we say.
My favorite thing is when people will be like, "Oh, I love that sermon that you gave," and like, by the way, it was something that you gave, not me.
People do that all the time.
It's
yeah. But people are like, that you said, what did the rabbi say last week? They don't remember most of the time. But the truth is, we don't remember. I'll look back at sermons like that I wrote 3 years ago. I have no memory, none. It's amazing. It's amazing.
I sometimes do that around the high holidays. I have that group of people that I write with. Sometimes I'll like put out a thing like I'm thinking about writing about this, and then like inevitably my friend Susie's like, "Oh, you wrote that 8 years ago. Here's the sermon,"
Right.
and I'm like, "Wait, what?"
Right.
Like
No, it's really true. Which means that we can give sermons again and again. That's fine. But I remember that you gave a sermon and you talked about that, and I think it was probably on Yitro. And of course, in the rabbinate, that's a particular challenge. Where work responsibilities are constantly pulling you away from family because the time. It's all kinds.
Yeah.
It's a number of hours, but it's also the timing of the hours and all that kind of stuff. But that's what Moses is struggling with here. And maybe he's not the greatest, family guy. Like maybe he doesn't do well in those roles.
I don't even remember where I heard this, but someone was talking about like you can be a great professional or you could be a great, family person or parent, but the question of can you be both?
Right.
And I like to think that you can be both. And when you come to these sections, you really have to like take a minute to pause to say that, it seems that Moshe did privilege, his work life. It reminds me, it was many years ago when President Obama was in office. And I remember I think I was reading this in one of in a book about his presidency, but I think it was in Michelle Obama's book. And she was saying about like how one of their kids got an ear infection when they were away on vacation. And he was like, I've got to get home for a meeting. And then just this question of like, do you really need to go to that meeting? Or can you stay here on the island with us? And I remember sort of like, no, he needs to get back to work.
Right.
Like it's an
It's the
ear
president of the
infection.
United States, right.
But it's like an interesting question when Yitro comes. I think in some ways his father, Yitro as Moses' father-in-law shows up and is sort of like, and here you go, here are your kids back, and here's your wife too. And it's sort of, I don't know if there's any like sense of tochacha rebuke in it, but sort of this like you can't ignore them.
Right.
I mean, yes, you have this really important work to do, but I'm bringing them back to you now.
Right.
You figure it out.
Well, so maybe, actually, I never thought of this before that I can remember. Means I probably thought about it last week, but maybe that's connected to then the next thing, which is Yitro trying to help Moses put into place this system which will reduce the burden of his responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, maybe like, here's your family. Remember, you're a father, you're a husband, and I know you're a busy guy, but here's something you can do that will make you a little bit less busy and, hopefully give you time to be attentive as a father and husband, maybe. I don't know.
It's an interesting thing. Like just even if we go into the scene, right? So here comes Yitro with Zipporah, Moses' wife, and the kids, Gershom and Eliezer, and he delivers the family back to him. And Moshe goes out to meet. I'm looking at the text in verse 7. Moshe goes out to meet Yitro. He bows low. He kisses him. And each ask after the other's welfare, and then they go into the tent. And that's actually like an interesting thing when you read it too, right? So like, here comes his wife, Tzipporah, whom he hasn't seen in a while, and his kids. But like, who is he paying attention to? His father-in-law.
Right.
Which is also sort of like this sort of weird, reunion, if you will.
Yeah.
And then I'm looking at verse 8. Moshe recounts to Yitro everything that God had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all of the hardships that had happened to them along the way, and how God had delivered them. And Yitro rejoices over all the kindness that God has extended to Israel in that delivery or deliverance. And Yitro says, like, Baruch Hashem, blessed be God. And this sort of affirms to Yitro that Hashem is greater than all of the other gods. And so then they sit down and they bring offerings and then they share a meal. Right. So that's sort of like an interesting thing. So we see the family coming, but then we only see the two guys in the tent.
Yeah.
And we see that Yitro is, well, stop. What do you find anything that's like interesting or curious or that we're sort of meant to learn from in this sort of?
I don't know. I mean, I think sort of the pshat, plain meaning of it is just that's how the Torah likes to move things along. Like, the truth is, in terms of the Torah narrative, it's not that important. Zipporah and the boys, they're not much involved with what's going on. Jethro is. Because he's going to...
The English name of Yitro.
Yeah, and now he's going to try to help Moses set up this sort of bureaucratic infrastructure. So I think you can just read it like that. I mean, I think, in terms of sort of messages that you could potentially draw out of the text, I think you can think about family and responsibility and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting also that Jethro, who is a Kohen Midian, right? A priest of Midian, and yet
not a part of the Jewish people.
Not a part of the Jewish people, and has this moment of sort of acknowledging Adonai or Elohim, the God of the Hebrews. So that's kind of interesting in and of itself. Maybe sort of reinforcing So you had Egypt, and that was sort of, in some ways, God establishing God's presence, and now God's presence, sort of the reverberations of what happened in Egypt, and now Midian, God, sort of spreading out, and God becoming a presence in a larger way, maybe. How about you?
I think there's some like interpersonal pieces that are interesting to me here. Like I feel like the way that Moshe honors Yitro, his father-in-law, is interesting.
Hmm.
And maybe it has some like interesting implications in terms of the way that we engage with our in-laws. Just I know you're super close with Becky's parents, and imagining the relationship also with Gail's dad.
And now with Austin's parents, Marshall and Joanne.
Yeah. Also,
Very lucky with that stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just an interesting thing of like how we tend to, the relationship with in-laws. I think that's an interesting thing, and I also think in some ways, how we engage with people. They were both interested and curious about what the other had gone through, and
Right.
then also rejoiced at the other person's successes, accomplishments, and blessings,
Right.
which I think is it's sort of, as opposed to sort of a Facebook type of cultural response, which is to look at what other people have and to feel like, oh, I want that, right? Like that, like envy, to feel like I'm actually going to rejoice in all of your blessings. I feel like it's a really healthy and nice way to be to
That's nice.
navigate life.
That's nice. A like in depth, if you will.
Yeah. Right.
Like today you just bump the thing, and that's great, but to do it with some depth and feeling. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing that you say that. I almost feel like the emojis, like when you use a heart, I wonder if like, I don't know. You just made me think about this idea of like when you put a heart there, like can their joy also, like elevate or increase your own happiness, right? Can it like impact your heart too?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm a very poor emoji user. Famously so. So
I have a few favorites.
yeah, Gail is a very facile emoji user. It's just not something I've mastered entirely.
So let's go into the next part.
Yeah.
The next day, we see that, Moshe wakes up, or Yitro wakes up, and Moshe is sitting out and sort of doing his work. And what Yitro sees is like lines all over. I feel like it's like
Kiddish.
it's funny. I feel like it's almost, I don't know the last time we waited in really long lines, probably an airport. But like I feel like it's that sort of line.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Right,
what I mean?
winding.
Yeah. Go all the way
Disney
around,
World.
around. Yep.
Before the fast pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And everyone's trying to wait in line to have Moshe adjudicate and give guidance and, solve all of the issues for
Right.
them. And that's when Yitro sort of, like, I imagine him like sleeping in a little bit. He wakes up, he has breakfast, he goes out and like wants to check out what his son-in-law is up to, see him in action. And the very like first thing that he says to him is that like this thing that you're doing is low tov, like it's not good,
Not sustainable. Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing because he goes on to acknowledge the why it's not good, but then also to give him advice on a different system that could be, as you said, more
Right.
sustainable.
Right. Addressing the issue a little bit. Yeah.
And he also says, I mean, basically, he's the first sort of professional coach, just saying like delegate, 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 and lest you, Moshe, think that there's no one to delegate to, I'm gonna help you with that too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's it. I think sort of all kinds of interesting potential ramifications for, so partially like there are rabbis whose rabbinates are personality driven,
Mm.
right? So the rabbi has a high opinion of himself or herself, and decides that the community will be built around the rabbi's personality. That's the thing that's going to draw people into the community, the rabbi. And there are rabbis like that,
Charismatic leadership.
Charismatic leadership, yeah. I'm not personally a fan of that model, but yesh.
Mhm.
It's certainly out there. Um, the challenge there, I think, maybe in Moses, is that you don't develop a true communal identity. What happens when Moses leaves and Joshua comes on board, um, which of course is going to happen by the end of the Torah, and so you need these sort of lasting communal structures in order to sustain the community over a long period of time.
Mm.
Over a long period. We're getting the 5-minute reminder, and we haven't even touched on the 10 Commandments.
Okay. Let's.
That means we have like 30 seconds a commandment, if I'm doing my math right.
Can we then just share with people that, I mean, just this language that Yitro uses? He says, "What's this thing that you're doing? What is this thing that you are doing to the people?" It's like very interesting. Why are you acting alone while all of the people stand around you from morning until night? Um, and I actually just think that that's also really interesting, because what Moshe is doing clearly is having an impact on him, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to sustain this, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna tire yourself out. And he gets to that later. Moses explains, it's because the people are coming to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come before me. I decide between one person and another. I make known the laws and teachings of God. And then Moses' father-in-law says again, it's sort of like a second rebuttal. And he says, but the thing that you are doing is not right. You will surely wear yourself out and wear out the people too. For the task is too heavy for you and you can't do it alone.
Right.
And then he says, now listen to me. I'll give you counsel. God be with you. You represent the people. And then he sort of comes into this new system.
Right. Right.
And Moshe says, like, he does it. He does what Yitro advises.
Yeah.
And then he says, like, hey, will you come stay with me?
Yeah. And Yitro says no.
No.
I
like,
I got to stop. I'm getting ready to
Pickleball.
retire or whatever. Pickleball. Pickleball. But a couple of things about that. One is it reminds me a little bit of there's that description that Rambam wrote of his own life. Where he talks about I think it was in response someone wrote a shaila to him, like a halachic question, and he didn't get back to the person quickly. And I think the person sort of, like we would say today, brought it back to the top of his inbox. And then he responded. And in the response, he basically starts out, he says, I'm sorry, I'm so busy. And he describes what his day is like. And it's insane. He goes and he works all day in his medical practice, essentially, is what it is. And then he comes back to the community, and all night he's there. And there are lines of people like waiting to see him all night. And you can't do it. It's not sustainable. And you and I both have said to people who are in caregiving situations, that there's a balance that you're striking between trying to take care of this person who's so important to you on the one hand, and on the other hand, you got to take care of yourself, because if you let yourself, get to a place that's a bad place, then you won't be able to take care of the person anyway.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for people to navigate that. It's challenging. I mean, again, the demands on Moses are enormous. And here the poor guy is, and like he's doing all this stuff, and then he's got his thesis defense.
Yeah.
The next couple of days where he's got to deal with Sinai and the 10 Commandments and the people and that whole thing, trying to get that whole thing taken care of, which is in and of itself like a huge moment, not just for him, but for everybody.
Yeah. No rest for the weary.
No rest for the weary. No rest for the
It's so funny. We go to the 10 Commandments for sure. But as we're talking
we're only going to get to one commandment.
As we're talking about this, though, like I feel like it's sort of like, behind the, in this part of the brain is this parsha, it always does this to me. And I think it does it to you too. It just stirs up issues of like the work that we do and, the heaviness
No
of
doubt.
it.
No doubt.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like in Yitro, everyone there's always a part of me that's like, why do we do what we do? Even though we love what we do, it's the, it's sort of this thing of like you really can sort of empathize with with Yitro.
Yeah.
And, you know,
It's no, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a hard. Going back to like remembering sermons. I remember one time I s- I said something along these lines. Like people say to you all the time, they say, Rabbi, it's so hard the work you do. Like you have to go to the hospital and you have to meet a family and you have to officiate at funerals and it must be so hard. It must be so hard. And I gave a sermon where I said, um, people say that to rabbis all the time. It's so hard, and it's hard. I don't remember how I phrased it, but essentially I said those things are hard, but what's harder is leaving our families to do them.
yeah.
Something like that. And I think there's truth to that.
Yeah.
But it's what you do. I mean, everybody's juggling that to one extent or another, regardless of your job. But it's a particular challenge in the rabbinate.
I think also you know, in some ways it's not only really leaving your family. It's really just, the question of of the time that you're given in your life to, to
Do whatever.
yeah,
Yeah.
to like have a hobby or to exercise or to foster friendships.
100%.
Or, there's a best job in the world.
Yeah, exactly. No, I've had conversations with my kids about that. Did we ever talk about that? Oh yeah, like I've said, I feel bad about it.
You never did
Oh
tell me
yeah,
that.
talked about it. My kids
Huh.
are like, "Oh, you're a fine dad." I'm like, thanks. Fine, dad.
You're fine.
No, because
Well, I remember when we were talking about taking off like a Friday night a month, and you tried it for the first time, and Becky was sort of like, "What are you doing here?" And you came back to work.
He came back the same night.
I mean, basically, like he was like, no one knew what to do with me at home.
right, exactly. Could have taken a nap. God's sake. All right, 10 Commandments.
All right, do it up.
So
You
so
start.
first of all, Jeremy's like,
20,
No.
20
I know.
seconds.
Should we
of
clip all
commandments.
that, Jerry?
20
No,
seconds.
keep it going. Keep it going.
No, we could do like the George Carlin. The George
right,
Carlin has
you
the
do it.
best routine. I can't do it because it's not for family audiences, but where he takes the 10 Commandments and boils them down into two. It's really brilliant, actually. So you can look that up later on YouTube if you want, but it's foul language.
Do we not want to just sing Kent or Emily's
I can't
song?
remember.
Was that not spectacular?
Yeah, well, it was great. But
We have time.
most important of the 10.
Mm.
Or would you say you just can't prioritize?
I don't know if I can prioritize, but like right in this moment, I would say that honoring one's parents, keeping Shabbat, and not being envious feel like three of the ones that I feel like could, if widespread, could help bring healing and improvement to our world.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you?
Absolutely. Very nice. Yeah, I don't. I mean, my thing with I think the 10 Commandments are so interesting. Just like sort of in and of themselves as this sort of weird structure in the middle of the Torah text, in a system that is has a legal emphasis in many ways, what will develop into the halachic system, and then you have this incredibly dramatic moment. I mean, I think it's really, to me, the most dramatic moment in the whole Torah, with Moses going up to the mountain and coming down, and then the thunder and the sound of the shofarot. It's really the smoke, and the people and their reaction. It's just astonishing. And then these sort of these pronouncements, and the way the Torah text, it's God, Elohim Yanenu B'Kol, I think is Kol, like in a voice. God is pronouncing these ideals, but then it's so interesting because as the halachic system develops, the 10 Commandments in a way get de-emphasized, right? Because you like
Another 603.
Yeah, I mean, but because you get to a point where if you're going to say the system is is God, is its origin has to do with God,
Mhm.
then it doesn't matter. Like if you're talking about a less important mitzvah or a more important mitzvah, if they both come from God, there's really no difference.
Mhm.
There's really, philosophically, like you get to a place where there's no difference. Now, that being said, I think, this is pre-halacha, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's before the halakhic system really is fully developed, for sure. I mean, the Torah text
Mhm.
itself, not just Ten Commandments. And so it seems that early on the tradition was emphasizing, those ideals, right? So, and there's a power to that, there's a power to that. And there's a power to that whole description of how it happens, and that you're left there standing with like, wow, these are
Yeah.
things I really have to, pay attention to. It's powerful to me. It's powerful to me. I love reading it. We always read it, and I love the moment when everybody stands together. It's intense.
Mhm.
It's intense.
Yeah. And by the way, that's going to happen this upcoming Shabbat.
Yep. This Shabbos. Yep.
So around probably like
11:06.
Okay. So if you're around and want to come hear the 10 Commandments being recited, it's yeah,
This Saturday.
it's sort of it's I feel like it's a communal moment.
Definitely. It's definitely.
It's almost like we're receiving those mitzvot again. It's almost like a recreation of Sinai.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very well. That's the the congregation stands, and
Mhm.
Ben, our ritual director Ben Kreschel will be reading the text, and he reads it so beautifully,
Yeah.
and it's powerful. Powerful. Like what is the derech?
Mhm.
What is the path? How are you pointed in the right direction?
It's interesting. I think in some ways also, though, Yitro brings along, or this parsha in particular, a shift, and we're going to sort of divide up the first half of Exodus and the second half of Exodus.
No doubt. No doubt.
In some ways, the first half is more like fascinating, awesome moments and
Narrative.
narratives.
Yeah.
And now, in the weeks to come, we're going to go into Mishpatim. We're going to get into a lot more laws and a lot more sort of technical details,
Right, and all the details of building Shkan and all that stuff.
which is beautiful too.
Yeah.
So be on the lookout for I think what will feel like a slight shift, but will be a fun place for us.
We're
to go
getting the
together.
sign. We're getting the sign from Jeremy over there. He's saying, he's going like, shh. No, he's going.
Stop talking.
Right, taking us off. Thanks as always for joining, folks. Have a good Shabbos. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.